Okay. I would like to welcome everybody to our business, in our series of our Business Foundation series. We are going to be doing Building a Startup Budget today. I have our presenter, Michael Sandman. He is a SCORE Boston mentor, and I'll let him fill in any background on himself when it's his turn. But let me tell you a little bit about SCORE. SCORE teaches, they provide information, and most importantly, we mentor. Our mentors are all volunteers that come from all different business backgrounds and experiences, and they're volunteering their time to help those that are ready to start a business or already are in business. We are still doing the video, phone, and email, have not gone to in person yet, but hopefully that will happen soon. SCORE is a national organization. So if we can't find answers to your questions within our chapter or in our district, we can go out to the national level to find that information to assist you. You might ask, how do I get a mentor? Super easy. There are the websites for the chapters in our district, which I will put in chat after I finish my intro. Also on those websites, I'm going to kind of backtrack a bit, but on those websites, you can find tons of templates, tools, videos, webinar recordings, tons and tons of information, along with finding a mentor. If you don't want to go to the website, go ahead and put a note in chat and let me know, and I will make sure the right chapter reaches out to you. And I'll actually also put my email address as well, and you can reach out to me with my email address. Okay. We do anticipate a nice crowd today, so I am going to ask that you try and use that Q&A tab on your Zoom toolbar for questions. That way I don't lose the questions. Sometimes the chat can get moving too much and everything scrolls up and I can lose track of questions. So if you can put your questions in the Q&A tab, we will do our best to get to all of them before we end today. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close my share, and I'm going to turn it over to our presenter.
Okay. There we go. How's that?
Looks great.
Okay, great. Welcome. I'm Mike Sandman. As Teresa said, I've had a couple of careers, about a 25-year career in manufacturing, and then I migrated over to consulting, management consulting, and worked for a consulting firm that did work in everything from cheese to rocket ships. It was kind of an interesting thing to see them, and they were literally all over the world. So I've seen a lot of things, and then I retired and began consulting work, mentoring work for SCORE. As Teresa said, we do free mentoring for small businesses and startups, and there are lots of us who have all sorts of experiences, and so almost certainly, whatever business you're in, there's somebody at SCORE who can help you start and help you manage an ongoing business, for that matter. We're going to talk about building a startup budget for a small company, and we've made this company a little bit complicated. It's a tree nursery. And so there's land that has to be purchased, and inventory that has to be purchased, and a vehicle that's going to be either purchased or leased, and a loan. And all of that has been put together here. Some of you will be starting organizations or businesses that are much less complex. They may be online, or they may be a service rather than have land and building and so forth. And that simplifies the process. So we're going to show you something that's a little bit complicated, and you can then simplify it for your particular needs. We're going to step through two different Excel files. One of them is for the startup budget for the tree nursery, and we will send you the template for that. And then I'm going to do a cash flow for the same business, looking forward a year after it starts. And again, there's an Excel file, and we'll send you that one. And you can fill in the blanks as you need to, and change the headings on cost categories and so forth as is appropriate for your particular business. So let's just talk about some real simple definitions here. Revenue or sales is what the customers or clients are going to pay. Net revenue or sales is what they pay minus any returns or allowances. So some businesses don't have returns and allowances. If you're somebody like Amazon, you have lots of returns. People send stuff back, and the net revenue is what clients have paid you after you've refunded money for something that you've had to give back to them. Expenses are your costs. It's what you pay to run the business. And there are some categories. There are startup costs, the equipment that you buy, the build out, the legal expenses, the website that you have designed and so forth. And then there are fixed expenses. Once you get started, there's rent, perhaps, web hosting fees, insurance, phone, all the things that go on where the revenue goes up or down. And the sooner you get your revenue going, the faster you'll be able to cover those fixed expenses. And then you'll have variable expenses, labor, including your own labor. And that's really important to remember that you have to pay yourself. And then any parts and supplies that you have, any inventory, they're called variable expenses because they go up and down depending on revenue. Some of the labor is actually fixed, probably yours. And you may want to put it in that category. But then if you spend some extra time or you hire some people, you're doing this as a part-time to get started, and then you move over to full-time, you split your own labor costs, if you wish to get into that level of detail, between fixed and variable. Profit is what's left over after all the expenses are paid. So net revenue minus all expenses equals profit. And you may have a negative number in there at the beginning, which means that you're losing some money, and that's not unusual when you're just starting off because it takes a little while for sales to build up. And we'll take a look at that as we go along. So, why bother with a startup or ongoing budget projection? Well, you have to figure out whether the business is going to enable you to reach your personal income goals. If you're trying to supplement your income, then obviously it doesn't, and you have a job doing something else, obviously the startup business doesn't have to yield quite as much money, but you certainly don't want it to be a losing proposition. You want it to make some money. So you have to figure out how much money you'll need to start up and to expand the business. And you want to get an understanding of the risks and rewards. If you put in X amount of dollars, what's the opportunity here? What's the reward that you're likely to get out of it? You want to identify development and startup costs separately from your ongoing expenses, because those startup costs, you'll need the capital, the cash in hand, in order to start the business. And you may get that money from out of your own bank account, from your family and friends, perhaps from somebody who is willing to loan you money. But in any case, you want to identify how much it is that you need to get the business off the ground. And then you want to identify what your ongoing expenses are so you can figure out what the profit is going to be coming out of the business. And you want to give a funder, whoever lends you money, whether it's family or a nonprofit lender or a bank, the information that they require. And sure, family may be a little bit less demanding in that regard than a bank or a nonprofit lender, but you should be thinking about, well, how am I going to justify what I'm asking for here if you're going outside to get some money? And finally, you want to provide a plan to help you guide your own decisions and monitor the results. So that's the purpose of doing what we're going to do today. There are some common concerns. These spreadsheets look a bit complicated, and I don't think I can do this on my own. I don't understand all the figures and so forth. Can I start my business without doing this? Well, yeah, you can, but you don't really want to do that because you'd be taking a risk if you don't understand how much money you need going in and what you're likely to get out of the business as it goes forward. And you really can do this. And if you can't or don't want to try it on your own, get a SCORE mentor to help you. That's what we're here for. There are lots of us who work with clients to help you build the financial projection. We won't do it for you. We want you to do it so that you understand it, but we'll certainly explain how it's done and make sure that you've got all of the questions, that you're asking all of the right questions for your particular business. So we're going to use a nursery, tree nursery that produces specimen trees, shrubs, and vines. Anne is projected that her third year sales will be $710,000, and we'll show you how she gets to that projection. And her customers are florists and consumers, two different kinds of customers, other businesses and consumers. And it's important to understand who your customers are. And if you have multiple categories of customers, you have to figure out what each one of those categories is going to buy from you as you go forward. So there are 6 worksheets in this budget template, and you think, oh God, 6 of them. So yeah, don't worry, they're one at a time. And take a breath, go through the first one, and then maybe the next day think about the second one, because you have to do some thinking. And so the 6 spreadsheets are, well, startup funds, how much do I need to get off the ground? Salaries and wages, what am I going to pay people as we go along in this business? Fixed operating expenses. Remember what I said about the fixed expenses for website hosting, for telephone, for rent if you are renting premises, for insurance, for getting your accounting done at the end of the year. Those expenses all go along no matter really what your sales are. Salaries and wages are obvious ones. Fixed operating expenses, you really have to think about a little bit. Projected sales forecast, how much am I going to have in revenue? And then we have a couple of spreadsheets for sales forecast, because we want to carry that out beyond the first year if we possibly can. Cash receipts and disbursements, we're going to take a look at how much money you're going to get in, how much money you're going to pay. Those are the variable expenses. Okay, startups. In this case, we're looking at a plant nursery. It's going to have different and perhaps more substantial expenses to start up than some other types of businesses. So one way or another, if you're raising plants, you need land on which to raise them. So we've got over here on the left-hand side, real estate, the land that needs to be purchased, buildings, leasehold improvements, some additions to the buildings that might be already on the site, equipment, furniture and fixtures. You're going to have an office and some things inside that building. Vehicles, because typically a nursery of this sort is going to rent or buy a truck to deliver. So the total fixed assets, the things that you're going to have to pay for right at the beginning, are $172,000. And then opening salaries and wages, well, Anne has figured nothing there, but she knows that she's going to have to pay insurance premiums ahead of time on her property and liability insurance. She knows she's going to have to bring in some inventory for about $30,000. She'll have legal and accounting fees to start up. She has to make a deposit with her local electric or gas utility, or both. She'll need some supplies and start some advertising and promotions before she actually gets the business going. And she needs some cash on hand of $3,000. And so fixed assets plus all of this money that she needs ahead of time is she'll need $41,800. And so she needs altogether to get this business going $213,800. So your startup will be completely different depending on what you're doing. You might not have all of those fixed assets, which makes it a lot easier to finance the business to get started. She's going to need to have some capital accumulated in all probability, because she won't be able to go out and borrow this in its entirety. But think about the categories that you need. Different types of businesses require different startup expenses. What do you need? What will it be used for? Consider the startup costs for employees before you make the first sales, their salaries, taxes, benefits. She's got 0 in there Okay, for her business, that may be correct. But for yours, you may have a couple of months of running time before you actually get off the ground where you have employees and you are having to pay them. So again, a SCORE mentor can help you figure that out and help you make sure that you don't miss any category for your particular type of business. Labor, once she gets going, she's going to have she's going to pay herself $25 an hour, and she's going to pay her full-time employees, 3 of them, $15 an hour, because she has to grow the plants and get them going and harvest them and send them off to the customers. And so there'll be 40 hours a week. And so she's got her estimated monthly pay at 4.3 weeks per year in a typical month, in an average month. And so that's what she's got $4,333 to pay herself and $7,800 to pay her full-time employees. And she's not going to have any part-time employees. So her total wages and so forth, salaries amount to $12,133. And then she has to add, and you have to add, payroll taxes and benefits. So we've calculated out Social Security and Medicare at the standard rates that are required. Her state unemployment tax that varies by state, and the federal unemployment tax, any kind of employee pension program that she has, or contribution to 401k, and we've got her total taxes and benefits of $1,373, and it's almost 15% of wages, and that's pretty typical. Fringe benefits, required fringe benefits, will amount to about 15%. If she's paying employee health insurance, which she doesn't have to do as an employer with less than 10 employees, but if she was larger, she would have to pay a substantial amount for health insurance, and then that payroll taxes and benefits fringe number would go up to perhaps 25%. So if you're paying your own employee health benefits out of the business, you should include that, obviously, and it will bump that total cost up. So that's the salaries and expenses, $13,507 that she'll be paying, and that she'll pay every month, and has to figure that into her expenses. Her operating expenses, both fixed and variable, we've got some categories here that are pretty typical. Advertising, car and truck expenses. She doesn't have any commissions and fees. Depending on your business, you might. She's not bringing any contract labor in. She has other than health insurance, that ongoing cost of $400 a month for her insurance. Again, she has property insurance. You may just have professional liability, so it might be as little as $100 a month or less. Legal and professional services, that's accounting and perhaps some help with contracts, any licenses that she needs. Usually there's some minimal cost for a business license for the municipality, but she doesn't have any state or other municipal licenses that she needs to get. Office expenses, rent or lease for vehicles, machinery and equipment, rent or lease other kinds of business properties, repairs and maintenance. She's not showing anything here. I would say that's probably not accurate, but okay, let's let that go, at least for the first year. Supplies for her business, travels, meals and entertainment, utilities for the facility that she's operating, and miscellaneous expenses. So she's projected here for January, the first month, and for an ongoing basis, $4,300. Some of those expenses are variable. Her contract labor, for example, if she needs contract labor later on, that's a variable expense. But most of these are actually fixed expenses. So let's think about sales and other projections, how much revenue is going to come in. It takes time to get that first sale and more time to build sales volume. And it's really important to be realistic about that. So ask people who work in the same sort of business. How long did it take you to get started? And build a rational, a reasonable month-by-month sales projection. If you expect to have $120,000 excuse me, I've got to just on my telephone, I'm not going to take any calls. If you expect $120,000 of revenue in the first year, you have to be realistic. It's not going to come in even $10,000 a month. It's going to start typically with a much lower number, and hopefully you'll build up to a higher number. So you might, if you're expecting by the end of the year to be $10,000 a month, your total for the year is not going to get that high. It will be, hopefully, in the second and subsequent years. Ask people who work in the same business, as I said, how long it took them. There's no problem asking somebody that question, particularly if you have a local business and you go somewhere outside of your own locality, or if you talk to people who are in a chamber of commerce or something of that sort. No, there's no problem asking, and most people will give you a straight answer. You want to think about who you're going to sell to. So her categories are direct to local retailers, through some representatives to distant retailers, and she's going to have to pay the representative something, or internet-based to end consumers. And that's because she has trees and specimen plants that have these different markets. You may have just one category of customer, or you may have more than that. So you have to decide how you're going to, or what your sales level is going to be to each one of those, and they'll start up at perhaps slightly different rates. So what unit categories make sense for your business? Are you selling a product like she is? Are you selling services, which you typically will charge either service by the hour or some fixed price for a particular contract of services, or some combination of product and service together? For example, if you're doing a heating system and air conditioning repairs, you're selling both the parts that go into the repair and your services. So determine what makes up your unit of sale, whether it's a product or a service, or again, a combination like that air conditioning and heating repair person. And then figure out, what does it cost you per unit of sales? And then from that, you have to have a price that obviously is higher. You have to have a profit, otherwise you won't make any money at all. So let's take a look at what she has. So she's going to sell her first product line are plant mix of plants. She's going to sell 125 of those in the year altogether. In January, she's only going to sell 6, and she's expecting from that over the course of the year $250,000, but she's only selling 11,000 in that first month. And her cost of goods sold, that's what that cost of goods sold, that's COGS, that's what that stands for. That's $6,050, and it's not her and her total margin, it's not her profit. She hasn't taken operating expenses out, is $4,950. So this is what it costs her. This is what she gets in revenue, and that's the number before she deducts her operating expenses. So, okay, where do you get some of this information? So we have the obvious one, Google. You can look for the costs of materials and products, and you can look for the prices that other people charge for this service if you're providing services on Google. But it's not just there. You can get information from suppliers. What does something cost? They'll certainly tell you that. They may be able to tell you who it is who's buying from them, and they should actually be able to tell you that if they're willing to. Learn from competitors. Find out what they charge. Ask them or ask their customers. Again, you can go outside of your own locality. If I'm in Boston, walking distance from Fenway Park. If I was starting a service to provide air conditioning and heating repair, I might go to somebody in Worcester or Springfield or Providence and ask them, gee, I'm going to be starting this in Boston. We're obviously not going to compete. Tell me a little bit about the how long it took you to get started, and what are the prices in this area for this kind of service. You want to estimate from the market how many units you're going to sell. The best way to learn how to do this is to work in the industry for a while. Very often someone will come in and they'll say that they want to start this business doing X or Y. They want to start a restaurant, for example. One of the questions we always ask is, what's your experience in the industry? If you've had industry experience, you'll know the answers to some of these things right from your own experience. If you don't, it's a really good idea to work in the business for a while for somebody else. And observe your competitors, see what they're doing. Join a trade association. Join the local Chamber of Commerce and talk to people who are in similar businesses in the Chamber of Commerce. Estimate the sales you need to make the business profitable and assure yourself that you can really get that level of sales after some reasonable delay of building up the sales, and figure out, can I really do this with the amount of time that I have in the market that I see? So lots of questions to answer, but again, do it one stage at a time. Figure out the costs that you're going to have, the startup costs that you're going to have, as we said in that first spreadsheet. Then think about the sales, and then think about the prices that you can charge for those sales by talking to people in the market, working in whatever experience you have in the industry, looking at what competitors do, one step at a time. Okay, next step. How about accounts receivable? So if you're doing business on the internet, you're going to have essentially zero accounts receivable. People are going to pay you with a credit card or pay you by PayPal or something of that sort, Venmo, whatever it is, and you're going to get your money right away. If you're doing a business like she is, she's selling to some florists and so forth. They may not pay her right away. They may pay her in 30 days or in 60 days, and some of them will take longer. And hopefully they'll all pay eventually, and she won't have any bad debt. But you can see here at the top that we're figuring that 30% will pay within 30 days, and another 30% within 30 to 60, and the 40% are going to pay in more than 30 days. So sorry, more than 60 days. So that's 100% of her total total sales, and that's going to be constant across years 1, 2, and 3. And then what's she going to have to pay out? How fast does she have to pay her suppliers? And we're assuming here that she's going to pay her bills somewhere between 30 and 60 days, because someone is going to be giving her, the suppliers that she has will be treating her as a commercial customer and giving her commercial terms. That is, she can pay the bill after delivery, maybe 45 days out, something of that sort. So there again, you have to make some assumptions. And obviously, if you have to pay right away and your customers are going to pay you over time, you need more cash to start with at the beginning, because you have to cover the amount that you have to pay out before you get money in from your customers. So just think about that from the perspective of the business that you're starting up. If you can get terms, that is, you can pay your bills 30 to 60 days after the supplies or services that you buy, whatever, that's great, particularly if you can collect money from your customers sooner than that. If the customers expect you to finance them for some period of time, if they're commercial customers, they typically will, you have to build that in, and this kind of a spreadsheet is a perfect way to do it, because it helps you sort of visualize what you're going to need, and this will feed into the amount of cash that you need to start up. Okay, you've done that step. Now, the next day, maybe after a cup of coffee in the morning, where am I going to get my money? So in Ann's case, you remember that we had a whole list of, let's go back and take a look at what she needed here. for her startup costs, $213,800. And this is where she's going to get the money. She has saved up owner's equity, $115,000. Perhaps she takes a mortgage on her, second mortgage on her home, or a mortgage or a line of credit or something like that. But in any case, she's built up $115,000 of cash. She gets a commercial loan from a bank and a commercial mortgage on the land that she's acquired. And she gets a vehicle loan for 15 of that $20,000 that she's paying out for a truck, and it adds up to her $100,000. So she's fully funded. And here are the interest rates that she has to pay and how long it's going to take. And here are the payments that come out of that on a monthly basis. One thing she doesn't use is credit card debt because the interest rates on that are horrendous. And so really, you don't want to ever finance the startup of the business with credit card debt, especially if you're going to have to carry a balance. So now let's stop a little bit and talk about where you get money. Now, most of you will start a business and you don't have $115,000, but you don't need it because you don't have to buy land and you might not have to buy a truck. You may have to rent something, rent space and pay a month in advance or 2 months in advance to the landlord, but that's not going to amount up to this much money typically. So startup businesses typically can get money most readily from family and friends. And you show people what you're going to do, work out this projection, show them that you can make some money at the end and pay them back, and you may be able to get some money from them. A bank typically isn't going to lend to somebody who's just starting up. There are a few local banks who might do that if they know you, or if you can put up enough collateral from a home or something of that sort. You may be able to get a loan from a bank that's local, typically not one of the larger banks. But there are nonprofit lenders. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples. There's an organization called Accion, A-C-C-I-O-N, Accion East. They do small business startups. There's the Mass Capital Growth Corporation, which MCCG, which similarly will do startups. And then there are sort of neighborhood or area nonprofit lenders. For example, there's one in the Boston area, the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation. They want a financial projection from you. They want a cash flow, and we'll show you how to do a cash flow at the end of this, once we're done with this piece of it, of the webinar. So you have to do all of this stuff, but they don't require that you have 3 years worth of profitable business, which is what a bank very well may require in order to give you a bank loan. So think about those kinds of sources, the family and friends and the nonprofit lenders, as the first place to go if you need capital to start up. But also remember that you're going to have to do this sort of projection in order to get money from even the nonprofit lender. Nobody's going to sign a check for you unless they see these numbers and see that you can make money out of the business, because they too, just like a bank, want their money back. And indeed, with most lenders, that's the key. Can I get my money back? If I can, okay, I will take the risk. Once you get a business going, you may very well be able to go to a bank. The bank will be more willing to lend to you if you get a loan that is Small Business Administration guaranteed. So a lot of people say to us, well, SCORE is associated with the Small Business Administration. Don't they lend money? No, the SBA does not lend money. It will guarantee a bank loan up to 80%, which greatly reduces the bank's risk. And banks will be much more comfortable in those cases. But again, they're typically only qualifying businesses that have some sort of a track record. But you can go to the SBA. The SBA is very helpful in the regional office in Boston. And similarly, there's a regional office in Providence. And I believe there are offices in Springfield and Worcester as well. and you can get to the SBA either directly or through a SCORE mentor. SCORE mentors will help connect you up once you get the business off the ground. For startup, pure startup, again, think about those nonprofit lenders. They can do things that a bank would never do. Okay, so we've got some projections here for what the startup costs are and what the sales are going to be in that first month. And now let's take a look at a cash flow projection looking forward for this business. So here's, whoops, we've got Nancy Spa here, which is not what this is. This is actually Anne's nursery. Well, we'll leave that there for the moment. But so we're going to say at the beginning of the month, Anne has, because she's raised some money and she's bought what she needs and she has some cash on hand to get started with. It's very important to have cash on hand and to get started with. So here's what she has for sales getting started. The first month, $10,000. And then over the course of the year, she builds up. And the peak of her sales is going to be in the summertime because she's selling plants. And she thinks that in July, she won't have much. Sales will go down because people go on vacation and so forth. And then they'll build back up and then tail off towards the end of the year. And she'll have $250,000 worth of local sales of plants, the various plants that she's selling. On the web, she's expecting that won't get started for a little while until May, and that she'll build up a reasonable amount in September, October, November, a peak, and then tail off. And then for distant nurseries that she's going to be selling to through representatives, it's going to take a longer time to get that started. So she won't see anything there until September. And that's a pretty honest, realistic startup. Maybe that first month is a little bit optimistic, but not too bad. And so at the end of the year, she will have brought in $347,000 worth of cash. And you can see each month, before she pays anything out, she has $41,800 to start. She's going to receive $10,000 in January. At the end of that month, that's what she has to spend, $51,800. She has to take all of her expenses out of that. And recognizing that her expenses are going to exceed her income, her cash is going to go down. And we're going to show you how it goes down. It goes down pretty substantially until she builds up to a reasonable level of sales so that her cash in exceeds the amount of cash out for the month. And it takes a while to do that. So let's look at that step by step. She has labor to pay right from the beginning. She's got to pay out $13,507 in labor, which includes paying herself. And maybe she doesn't need to take that money out, but she probably will. If she's working at this business full-time to get it off the ground, she needs money to live on. And so you remember that we had payroll and payroll taxes, and it came up to $13,507. That exceeds the cash that she brings in, that $10,000 that she brings in. In fact, it continues to exceed the amount that she brings in right up until April, when she brings in $20,000. And then in May, $45,000. So it begins to look better about 3, 4, 5 months out. But right at the beginning, she's going to be losing cash, and she has to recognize that. And that's indeed why she needs that $41,000 to start off. Okay, let's follow this the rest of the way down and see what happens in January. And then we'll come back and look at the whole picture. So she has another $4,300 worth of operating expenses. And we're treating these as fixed expenses, so you can see all the way across the spreadsheet, she's spending $4,300 a month on those expenses. And it comes out to $51,000 at the end of the year. And then she has other expenses, depreciation. That's not a cash expense, actually, it's an accounting expense. It's in here as a cash expense, and we actually have to fix that. That's going to come out of there. She's paying a commercial loan, a commercial mortgage, and we saw in her borrowings what that's going to amount to, and she's gradually paying those down, so the amounts gradually decline over time. Okay, so she's paying $375 a month in January and only $369 in December. And the same thing with the loan, $254 in January, $229 by the time it gets to December, because she's paying, that's a 5-year loan, she's paying it down more quickly. And she has a line of credit with the bank. The bank says, well, we can see that you need some cash, and you've got some land here that has value, and we'll, in this case, we'll give you a line of credit. And she's paying that down. Actually, she's using more and more of that until she can begin to pay it down over the course of the year. So all of her other expenses add up to $1,400 in January. And so all the January expenses are labor, $13,507, the other expenses, sorry, the operating expenses of $4,300, and the other expenses, $1,434, amount to $19,241. Her cash at the end, she brought in $10,000. She had $41,800 to start. She's only got $32,500 left at the end. And each month, that's what happens until in March, she goes all the way down to cash at the end of $13,752. And then it begins to gradually build back up. And you can see it builds up month by month as her income, her revenue, begin to exceed the total expenses. So in May, when we begin to see the light at the end of the tunnel here, she has total expenses of $19,636, and we've projected in May that she'll bring in $45,000. So it begins to bring her cash back up. Okay, this cash flow is really very, very important for anybody. The nonprofit lenders are very interested in the cash flow. Very, very important for you to put together in a realistic way. So looking at the nursery here, and I'm sorry about the Nancy Spa thing. Looking at the nursery here, we have a realistic scale up of revenue. It's a seasonal business, so you have an increase during the summertime, except for a vacation period for the local gardeners, and a slower startup for this category of expenses, sales on the web, and much slower for nursery. Other kinds of businesses will have faster or slower startups, and you might have 4 or 5 or 6 different kinds of products, so we've left space in the template for that. You can put in, when you get the template, whatever you want here for your categories, and you can put in whatever you want here for the numbers, but be realistic. That's really very, very important. And again, be realistic here for labor. Now, what she's showing is that her labor is constant, doesn't vary by expenses. That's probably not terribly realistic. It's probably going to go up. I'm not sure what those people are doing in January, February, and March. If they're not, maybe they're getting the plants going, getting ready for the season. But in any case, she's projected a steady state. As sales go up, typically your labor costs will go up. So think about that realistically. Operating expenses, same thing. These are probably going to stay pretty constant. Most of these are fixed expenses, except for contract labor, which she might bring in. And contract labor it's not included in payroll, because if you bring in a contractor, you don't have to pay their Social Security. If you do that in Massachusetts, I don't know about Rhode Island or other New England states, but if you do that in Massachusetts, there are very strict rules about when somebody's contract and when they're not. And most of the time, most of you are going to be bringing in people who you'll have to put on the payroll and pay their fringe benefits for. So talk to an accountant about what those rules are. And there are something like 6 or 7 categories, 6 or 7 rules that you have to comply with in order to call somebody truly a contract laborer. But the rest of these are indeed fixed expenses, steady through the year. And you may find your cash flow is a little bit different than this. For example, insurance, you may pay a premium on a quarterly basis. So you would change this 400, 400, 400, 400 to 1200, nothing, 00, 1200, 00, and so forth. Try to be realistic in what you do with this spreadsheet, this part of the spreadsheet. I guess all parts of the spreadsheet. And same thing here. Again, depreciation is not a cash expense. It's actually a write down of value. This is more depreciation is something that goes into a tax return. It should come out of here. But other expenses, those are certainly the loans that you have. And where did that number come from? Where did those loan numbers come from? They come back here from the source of funds that we outlined. These loans here, and the loan payments. So the sources of funding that you put together will flow down into this spreadsheet. Sorry, I did this piece of the spreadsheet all the way down here. I guess at this point I should stop and take any questions. Teresa, what have we got?
Yeah. What if you had an expense that was a yearly expense, a one-time yearly expense? Should you break it down monthly, or how should you treat something like that?
Right. So that's what we were saying earlier. You should, in the cash flow, you put it in the month that you expect to pay it. So the insurance cost, for example, I mentioned that if it was paid quarterly, it would be 1200, 00, 1200, 00, and so forth. But yeah, do it realistically. That's important because it's going to affect the cash that you need. And particularly, you'll have to prepay a lot of those expenses. And so it sort of front loads the cash needs. It adds more cash needs to January or February than other months. Next one.
Yeah. Is there a ballpark percentage you recommend adding to the cost per unit to determine price per unit so you can afford the operating expenses and make a profit?
Good question. It really depends on the business that you're in. So traditional storefronts will typically be paying about half of the retail price for an item for that's when they bring it in, and the rest of the other 50% covers their costs and their profit. And that's a very old formula that applies to the traditional retail business. Other businesses, the margins will be the amount that of cost might be smaller. I was in the manufacturing business for a very long time. Our costs ran about 80%. Because we had a lot of big factory, and we had plant equipment and labor and so forth, but we had pretty low expenses to sell, and so the 20% difference was adequate to cover our ongoing operating costs and our fixed costs, and give us some profit. Other businesses will be different. If you are doing consulting work and you have a consulting firm, I ran a consulting firm, I can tell you that we charged $300 or $400 an hour. We weren't paying people $300 or $400 an hour. We were paying more like $75 or $100 an hour for our consulting labor. But we needed those costs because we had high marketing costs. They weren't fully employed 100% of the time. And we kept them on the payroll even if they were writing proposals to get the next project. So it really depends on the business. But again, you can find out what typical margins are by talking to people in the field. So hopefully that's a reasonable enough answer. But it's a knowable. You can know it. You can learn it for the particular business that you're going into. Go ahead.
How do you determine miscellaneous costs? Is it a percentage?
So you're talking about the sort of these operating costs, or the cost below that, these sorts of costs. Well, so a lot of these costs fall out of come directly from the commercial loans and so forth, that's from the borrowing cost that you have calculated previously. The costs over here, how much are these? You have to talk to people who can help you with that. Insurance, talk to a commercial insurance agent for the particular kind of business that you're in. You have to perhaps talk to an accountant about what the accounting fees are going to be. Typically, small businesses don't have a lot of legal costs, startup costs. You don't need a lawyer to incorporate to set up a limited liability corporation. But if you're writing a contract or something of that sort with somebody, then you'll have a legal cost. Talk to a lawyer and ask how much they charge. You'll have web hosting and so forth. All of those costs can be determined by asking whoever it is that's going to supply you. And what kind of, what's their schedule for paying for that. So your web design costs is a startup cost. All of that's going to come before you even open the door, turn the key on your business. Your web hosting costs will probably be on an annual or quarterly basis. And ask the people who are the suppliers. And then think about, if there's a number that, you can't find, what's reasonable? What do you think makes sense? So there's some homework to do here, I guess, is the best answer that I can give you.
Okay. How would I record making a loan to myself, like the owner's equity?
Okay, good question. So you put money into the business on a loan basis and you pay that loan back out. It's just like a commercial loan. If you're paying yourself interest, then calculate that interest and calculate the principal that's being paid back. It's no different than any other loan in terms of recording it. If you have, now we're not talking about accounting here. We're talking about cash projections, and you should talk to an accountant about the details of that. Because if you're paying yourself interest, you have to pay a tax on that interest that you receive. So talk to an accountant about how to handle that from a tax perspective. But from a cash flow perspective, it's just like any other loan.
Is there a general percentage of sales for each line item that should be loosely followed? For example, rent should be 30% of your sales, labor should be 30% of sales, et cetera.
Right. So that's sort of like the question that we asked before, how much, what's the percentage of markup, a profit margin that I would expect to have over the incoming costs? It depends on the type of business. So I'm going to give you a source actually for some of this. The Boston Public Library in particular has something called the Kirstein Business Library. And they have reference librarians and they have access to a databases actually of information about typical costs for typical businesses. And it's the database is RMA. It used to be called Robert Mars Associates, but it's RMA. Hold on a second. I'm actually going to take a look at that here. Give me a minute to see if I can find that for you. Research. I haven't got it right here, but actually maybe I can, give me one more second and I'll see if I can find it. Yeah, okay. So it's the Risk Management Association, RMA, and they build these databases for banks. So a banker should know if they're looking at your projections, what the typical costs are for and percentages are for the business that you're in, whether it's construction or a service business or supplying plants or whatever it is, nursery, whatever. And you may be able to go to the bank, the local bank, and say, a banker, and say, hey, can you, if you guys get this RMA Association, Risk Management Association information, can you tell me a little bit about the percentages for the kind of business I'm going into? But the other way to do it is to go to the research librarians at Kirstein and ask them if they can find information about the particular type of business and what the expense ratios are for that business. So there are sources. And then, of course, if you talk to people who are in the business, they should be able to tell you. But you want to talk to somebody that you're not going to compete head to head with, because they'll be reluctant to talk to you. Talk to somebody who's 50 or 100 miles away. And the other thing is, if you join a trade association, they may very well accumulate data on this sort of thing. So there are sources. Again, all of this takes some homework.
Okay. Typically, how accurate are our projections? What margin of error can we expect
Sure.
safely?
A reasonable question. So if you're plus or minus 10% on these projections, you're doing really well. And it's important to do the monthly sales projection, because month by month, you should look at the projection and say, as you're going along, and say, oh, wait a minute, am I making my projections here? And that's really important to make those projections real. So it's not perfect. It's a plan. No plan is perfect. Unexpected things happen. If you were entering the restaurant business at the beginning of 2020 and you made a projection, it was going to be way off. A crazy event happened, and it's still with us. So you have to recognize that sometimes something will drop out of the sky, be it negative or positive, and it'll change it'll force you to recalculate all your projections. But plus or minus 10% is reasonable in a reasonably stable situation. Doesn't, as I say, doesn't need to be perfect, which is one reason why you never want to do a cash flow projection and be looking at, well, I'm going to show you the back down here. Ann gets down to only $13,700 left in the bank before she begins to build it back up. You never want to get down to zero, and you certainly want to never get down to a negative number. You want to leave yourself some margin down here for error. Okay, no more questions.
There was one in chat
Okay.
that I would just want you to revisit real quick. You had named like Dorchester Bay and
Oh, sure.
yeah. Can you just list those again for real
Yeah.
quick?
How about,
And
can I put something in the chat here? Yeah, I can.
you can put it in chat. Yep.
Okay.
And while he's doing that, just a reminder, you can find the recording for today on our website, probably starting tomorrow. You find it under the take a workshop tab, and there at the top of the page will be previously recorded webinars, and you will find this and other recordings as well.
Oops. Massachusetts growth capital. Those are all nonprofit lenders. MGCC and is in particular is probably the first stop that I would make, unless you're in the Dorchester Bay Economic Development Corporation catchment area, or if you're in another urban area where there is an economic development corporation like this. There's one in South Boston. Dorchester Bay covers Dorchester, Hyde Park, Rosendale, Roxbury, West Roxbury, so everything south of downtown Boston except South Boston. There are others in East Boston and elsewhere that will help. And you can typically get that help, that information from the economic development office of the municipality that you're in. So I live in the town of Brookline. There is an economic development officer, and I know she knows who the lenders are in the community. And then we have a question: will we get the spreadsheets? When will we get them? Soon.
Well, I put them in the chat. They're all they're all in the chat. All you have to do is click on it and download it.
All right.
Plus, I put a link to the website where you can find the blanks of these templates as well.
Great.
So all that information was in the chat. So if you want to scroll back through there. And how do you calculate increase in revenue as you add new products or services as you go from a small home business to a brick and mortar location? Okay, let's make sure I understand that question. How do you calculate increases in revenue as you add new products? So, okay. So as you're adding new products, you think about
you're adding a new line item. So let's go back to that product 1, 2, 3 thing. Okay, here we go. So we have the plant mix, the local sales, the web sales, and the selling to distant nurseries. And as these come online, you can see that they ramp up at some rate. And if you were adding a new product out here, perhaps product 4, you might find that it didn't really get started until the next year, and you want to do this the same projection for the second and third years. So you'd put it in under, say, April 2023, and you add it and use the same thought process, the same pattern. I'm going to start off with this new product. Going to take me a little while to get that product going. Here's the rate at which I expect to have it. And if you put it into the spreadsheet, obviously it will add in. So that's why we're sending you the link to the templates as well. The templates will help you do this. I encourage all of you, when you get this template, if it looks like, oh my God, where do I start? Talk to a SCORE mentor who can help you with this. And get some guidance. They'll help you figure out the categories. They'll figure out whether your projections for sales seem reasonable to them, at least. They may be able to talk to somebody else in the SCORE organization who has direct experience in the business that you're in. We have in Boston, we have over 80 people, and in the rest of the state and in Rhode Island, we have similarly substantial organizations in Springfield and Worcester and southeastern Mass, northeastern Mass, and Rhode Island, on the Cape and Islands. There are a lot of people, hundreds of people, literally, in this region who can help you. And then we do have a database of 10,000 people. So get some help if when you get the templates, get some help with them if you're concerned about, okay, where do I begin and how do I get this right? Okay.
Okay, last question is, how do I get a SCORE mentor? You can go to the website, which I did post those at the beginning, or you can just email me out. My email address is there on my video tag. It's outreach@scoreboston.org, and I can make sure you get connected to the proper chapter. You can also just go to the score.org if you want to make it really simple and scroll down, and there's a box that you can put your zip code in, and they will help you connect to the right chapter as well. So there's many ways to get a SCORE mentor. So any of those will work. So I just want to thank everybody for joining us today. We hope to see you again at our next Business Foundation webinar. And you guys all have a great week.
Okay. Thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.